Hey guys, back with some M14 cards I'd like to talk about. Today is Wednesday, June 26th, and the M14 previews officially start next week, but we've already had like 60 to 70% of the set spoiled, and I'd like to talk about some cards that I've already put in my cube, at least for testing, not necessarily for long term, but some cards I put in my cube for testing. So first off, is an easy card to talk about, Elvish Mystic. It's Land of War Elves, Findorn Elves, reprint of those cards. It's an Elf Druid. Now, that's not really relevant for my cube. It's an Elf Druid. It's fine. It's a good card. There are a lot. I even run, personally, I'm running Arbor Elf to go with the Land of War Elves and the Findorn Elves. And this card will slot in there just nicely, even in addition to those other cards I'm already running. I don't run Avacyn's Pilgrim. I don't run Elves of Deep Shadow. I just run the straight green guys. But I think you need a critical mass of these guys if you want to really enable your super green ramp deck. Personally, I really focus on the 1-3-5 strategy with my cube, my green ramp decks. You know, the 1-drop mana elves. Then the 3-drop cards like your Kodama's Reach, your Cultivate, your Harrow. I even run Growth Spasm. Not many people run that card in their cube. But it's actually been pretty good as just another redundant effect. Yes, to me it's the worst one of those 4 3-drop green ramp spells I listed, but it gets the job done and sometimes gives you a creature to block or gives you a creature to equip. I've seen it before. It doesn't happen too often, but it does happen sometimes. So I really go for the 1-3-5. I run more 5-drops green cards in my cube than I do the green 4-drops. The green 5-drop section is loaded. I won't go over all those cards, but the green 5-drop section is really loaded, so the 1-3-5 is something I focus on, and Elvish Mystic's going to help me do that. So you have to ask yourself, how many cards like this would you want to run in your cube? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, of course I run, your Birds of Paradise and your Jiraga Tree Speaker, those cards as well, but how many cards exactly like this would I run? I probably would still run a couple more even beyond where I am. If nothing else, ultimately I would cut Arbor Elf if I had to, but I'm not anywhere close to doing that right now. So Elvish Mystic is a card that is going to make my cube in the long term. It's in the cube right now in the testing. I have my M14 testing zone, which is 5 cards I'm going over with you today. But Elvish Mystic is definitely going to stay in my cube for the long term. Next card, Shadowborn Demon. So this is a card card was spoiled really early. I think it might have even been spoiled before Dragon's Maze came out. But anyway, so it's a 5-drop, 5/6 flying demon, so loses to Baneslayer. So when it comes into play, you destroy a non-demon creature, which is almost every creature in the whole cube that it can target. And then most of the time, at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are fewer than 6 creature cards in your graveyard, sacrifice a creature. So 90% of the time, at least, I would say that you're going to end up sacrificing a creature, even in a black deck. But there are ways to mitigate that. I mean, there are other sacrifice effects that black has to take advantage, plus things like Recurring Nightmare, this card's awesome with, or a card like Mimic Vat, this card's really good with. And worst case, you sacrifice your weenies, the ground guys that are kind of in a stalemate that you don't care about, or sacrifice Bitter Blossom tokens. In exchange, you get a 5/6 flyer for 5. Overall, I think this is a pretty good card. It's been really good. I honestly have limited experience with it so far, but it's been pretty strong. We cut Drana a few months ago, and I like Drana a lot, but I think this card's even better than Drana, which I think Drana is a fine cube card. And I don't know where I would place it. I haven't had enough playtime yet to be able to rank it successfully in the black 5-drop section, but honestly, that section is not very crowded anyway. But a 5/6 flyer for 5 that is pretty much an unconditional kill spell when it comes into play is quite good. Having to sacrifice your Lilias guy each turn hopefully is not a big deal. But I think, again, I run 540 as the size of my cube, 540 powered. Shadowborn Demon's a card I foresee staying in the cube for at least a little while, at least for the next couple sets. Lilias Rever. So it's a 4/3 Death Touch for 4. And what do people call it? It's sort of Famine and Body, right? So that's the Famine sword because you discard a card, and the Body because you get a 2/2 creature. So it's a 4/3 Death Touch for 4, which is fine. I mean, the base stats are solid. And if you just deal damage even one time, you get so much value that it's just tremendous. But the stats are the killer right there. As a lot of people were saying when it was spoiled in the Cube forums, they would much prefer it was a 3/4. I'm with them just because it would die to a lot less of the red removal that's out there. As it is, it dies to Lightning Bolt. But similarly, a card like Sublime Archangel, which a lot of people panned originally as just being a 4/3 flyer for 4, in a much, admittedly, more crowded 4-drop white section, but that card has been really good for us. Lilias Rever, I'm still not sure about. I think it's a little sketchy. I don't think it's going to make my cube for the long term, but it's in for testing, and I'll be honest, I think I've only seen it hit the battlefield one time in maybe 3 or 4 cube sessions. So not a lot of experience. People aren't playing it very much, so I don't know if that's a sign or not. But I'm definitely going to give it a try for at least a couple more weeks. Again, right now we're about 2.5 weeks before the pre-release weekend for M14. So I think it's probably a card. If I ran a 720 cube, I think I would run it, just as because it's a cool effect. I mean, being able to do damage and getting all that value seems really sweet. If you could do a Lightning Greaves or something on it, it'd be great. Or if you had a way to give it trample, but I don't run a lot of cards that do any of those things. So as it is right now, it's in the cube for testing. Not optimistic about its long-term viability in my cube. So next card. This one's been spoiled for a while as well. This is just a very vanilla creature. It's a 3/3 for double green. Casting cost is kind of a bummer. I know there are green-white cards out there that's the same thing, just a 3/3 for 2. But if you support green aggro, I feel like this card is going to be pretty relevant. Just being able to curve out with like a Jungle Lion or a Tracker into the Tusker, into another 3 power guy, is just really important, into a Vengevine. That's kind of the curve if we're just looking mono green, which obviously is not a good archetype. But mono green aggro, if you just go Experiment 1 into Tusker, into 3-drop like a Wolfy Avenger or something like that, into Vengevine, that's kind of where you want to go with this. And just having a 3/3 guy for 2 is pretty strong. Again, even with all that positive stuff being said, I'm not 100% sold on its value for the cube. The casting cost, if it was a 1 green, it probably would be overpowered, quote unquote, by their standards. But I think it being 1 green would be fine. And then it would be a windmill slam for the cube, because the casting cost would be so much better. As I've redesigned my red and white sections over the last 6 to 9 months, I've really tried to get rid of those double casting cost cards. Cards like Ember Hauler, cards like the Knights. Just cards that are fine to good, but does their value, their difficulty in casting, does it more than make up for the quality of card they are? And if the answer is no, then I get rid of them. Like 8.5 Tails I cut. I won't go over the whole list, but that's a lot of the cards that I don't run anymore just because the casting cost is mitigating. I guess I haven't had to face that same decision in the green section because the green section hasn't encountered that yet. So this is one of the early tests for that. I mean, there's like Strangleroot Geist, but that card has so many other implications besides just being a beat stick. It has other implications in other decks, the Sack decks and the Mimic Vat decks, stuff like that. But I'm not sure. So as it is right now, it's in the cube. I think I will keep it in the cube for at least a set to see how it plays out. Honestly, green aggro is not a heavily played archetype in my cube, though I think the pieces are there to have a really good green aggro deck, green white, green red, even green black. A little more sketchy on that. So I'm going to keep it in the queue probably for a little while just to give it some playing time, but I just really wish it costs 1 green. So next card, Young Pyromancer. This card's been getting a lot of buzz in the... I've heard people talk about it for like Legacy. I don't know. Maybe that's just some people at my store talking about it. But anyway, it's an interesting cube card. It's a 2/1 for 2, which is fine. Puts it on pace with like your Hearth Kami and Torch Fiends and cards like that. And in my personal cube, I put it in place of Gutter Snipe, which had actually been doing okay. Not great. It had been doing okay. And I think being able to get consistent value and keep building up your board presence just by casting spells you would normally cast anyway is pretty solid. You're essentially paying 1 mana for that ability, turning it from Jackal Pup into Young Pyromancer costs the extra mana, but then every time you cast a spell, you get a creature. So it seems pretty good. Like, it seems like it's going to be a really, really good cube card, especially in those heavy red decks, those heavy red spell decks. It'll be really good in Is It as well. Like counter your spell. Yeah, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it's not color specific. So like if you counter one of their spells or do something like, or bounce something, you get a creature and can just build up a board presence that way. And can even work well in like Is It Control if you're just trying to buy some time to get into the late game by just getting yourselves a bunch of chump blockers. That seems good. So I'm optimistic about this card for my cube. I think it'll be in there for the long term. Again, I run 540, but I think this card will be good for the long term. So I really haven't got a chance to play it with it yet. I haven't seen it in action very much. It's only been in there for a few weeks, but I think it's going to be good for the long term. Last card I'd like to talk about is the Ogre Battle Driver. So close. If this card had haste, it would be sweet. But it doesn't, and it's in the super crowded 4-drop red section already, and I know they're getting ready to preview Chandra here in the next week or two, and I'm really concerned that it's going to cost 4, and it's going to be unfortunate if it does, because that means I might have to cut a 4-drop, which would be tough to do. But I feel like the red 4-drop section is one of the most stacked ones in the whole cube, and it takes something really good to break into. Like Hellrider was really good, so it broke in. Hero of Oxid Ridge was really good, so it broke in. I know it was a couple years ago, but Koth broke in, and that's been really good. We've lost cards like, for me, I've lost like Goblin Ruin Blaster out of that section. The Ravenous Baboons I cut out of there. A card like Avalanche Riders is a card I really don't want to cut, just because they're just not going to print good land destruction cards anymore. So once you start cutting them out of your cube, you're never going to get to see cards like that again. You're just not, unless you bring it back. So, but honestly, looking at my red section right now, that might be my worst 4-drop, which is tough to say. But anyway, so in that regard, I guess I'm glad this doesn't have haste, because I might have to cut another good red creature for it. But this is a card it's just not good enough. Like the 4-drop red section, anything 4-drop plus in red needs to be truly nuts to make it into my cube, just because my red section is so aggro-centric, so focused on just pummeling your opponents and doing so much damage. And that's why like Zealous Conscripts was a great addition for the red section. And for another reason, that goes well in other decks and is easily splashable. So that's another recent red card. And Thundermaw Hellkite came in M13. Don't think we're going to get to see a card on par with that in M14 as far as a big red card. So that's Ogre Battle Driver. So those are all the cards I wanted to talk about for M14. I talked about Garrett because that just got spoiled. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? That just got spoiled. And I put up a separate video for that, just kind of my initial reaction to it. So to recap all these cards here, Elvish Mystic is going to make the cube long term. Shadowborn Demon, I feel good about it. For the long term, I think it's going to be pretty solid. I've liked it so far. I've been happy with it. And just 5-power flyer guy just ends the game in a hurry unless it's facing a Baneslayer. Lilias Rever, not sure. Going to try it for a little while to give it a chance, but ultimately I don't think it's going to be good enough. Colonian Tusker, just really concerned about that mana cost. If the mana costs were different, I would play it forever. But as it is right now, I'm going to try it for at least a set to give it enough time, just because I think it's going to take that long to see enough green aggro decks to give it a fair shake. Young Pyromancer is going to be great. 2-1 for 2 is already okay. And then just being able to make more guys. I'd love to combo it with like a Reckless Charge or something. That would be sweet to just keep giving your guys haste and getting more guys. That'd be awesome. Last card, Ogre Battle Driver, is just not good enough. I'm not even testing it. So that's the summary of my M14 spoilers so far. Again, today is June 26th. The official previews start next week, and I'm looking forward to that. And hopefully we can see the new 3-drop Chandra that has some relevant abilities and is cube-worthy.